Welcome to the P5 Masterclass videos. You're watching video number 1, Installation and Licensing. Ideally, watch these videos in sequence, starting with the installation and licensing video, followed by either number 2 or 3, depending on the type of target storage you wish to back up or archive to, followed by number 4 or 5, depending on whether it's a backup or an archive workflow you're wanting to set up. By watching 3 of these videos in sequence, you'll be able to install and set up a backup or archive workflow to your desired storage. You will find more videos to explore in this series on ArchiWare's YouTube channel. In this video we'll be covering installation of P5 across Windows, Mac, Linux, Synology and QNAP platforms. We'll look at updating a P5 installation, how to install license keys, and then finishing with some general troubleshooting tips. So looking at operating system support, you can install P5 on macOS, on Windows, on Linux, also on Synology and QNAP, with the latter two being NAS devices. We also provide installers for FreeBSD, but we will not cover that in this video specifically because it's very similar to installing on Linux. Check this system requirements page on archiware.com for full details of operating system support. We have a couple of different types of installer on the Mac. We have a DMG file that allows you to double click and run a graphical installer. We also provide a TGZ archive for installing via the command line, pretty much the same as you would do on Linux. On Windows we have a typical package, Windows package installer, that is a .exe that you run. On Linux there are a few different options. So there's a TGZ file for simply expanding in a folder and running the start script. For Debian style Linux distributions there is a .deb file, and for Red Hat style there is an RPM. So there are various different options on Linux to satisfy everybody's favorite way of installing software. On Synology and QNAP, these are NAS devices that have internal stores, so you can go to a store and search for an application and you'll find ArchiWare P5 in the stores for both Synology and QNAP. Sometimes the store version will lag the version that's available on ArchiWare's website, in which case it's possible to sideload on a QNAP and do a manual install. But that situation may change. That's already not possible on the Synology. Another option for both of these operating systems is to use a Docker containerized version of P5, which is slightly more complicated and won't be covered in this video, but we hope to make an additional video to show how to do that. This is ArchiWare's download page, which is available from the main navigation here on archiware.com. And you can see in here all of the install packages that I just mentioned, along with brief information about operating system requirements. On this page you can see a manual installer for QNAP and some of the DSM Synology operating systems. So come to this page to grab your installers. It's the new install button that will download the installer, and the upgrade button which will give information about upgrading P5 from an older version. Let's begin with this Windows system. So I've downloaded the ArchiWare package from the download page that I showed you, and inside we have these 4 items. There's a README. One of the prerequisites is that you have the Visual Studio 2015 redistributional software installed, which is present on most Windows installations current as of 2024, but for older Windows servers it might be needed to run this executable, which is included in the zip, but this is a recent Windows, so I'm just going to run the MSI package. So we get the usual setup wizard. So we click next, we agree to the license terms, we install in the default folder, and I'll come back and tell you what that folder is in a moment. And then we click Next to begin the installation. So that completed, and you see the installer package, which is now in the background, has indicated that the installation is complete. And part of the installation is that a browser opens with the P5 web admin interface already loaded. So you can see the browser is pointing to the loopback address for this machine, and we publish our HTTP web admin interface on port 8000. You can also access HTTPS web admin on port 8443, but this is going to be using a self-signed certificate. So it's generally easier just to use HTTP for administration over the LAN, where security isn't going to be an issue. And of course, you can point your browser across the LAN or even across a VPN to the IP address of this host to administer it via a web browser in much the same way that you can for many software and appliances these days. So what also gets installed is a little service menu down here where we're able to stop the P5 service. So P5 on Windows runs as a service, so this allows you to stop and restart the P5 service. You can also stop and uninstall the service completely, which would require a reinstallation of P5. And you can open P5 in the browser, which would result in us seeing P5's login screen like this. So that's P5 installed. I'll run through how to go into the web admin interface and to do things like add licenses later in this video. But the one thing I do want to show you is P5 installs into program files, ArchiWare, Data Lifecycle Management Suite, and that's where P5 lives. And the config folder, which I'll also cover later in this video, is where you might go to make a change to the default HTTP port that P5 runs on, which you would do by renaming that file. But otherwise, everything else in this folder isn't something that you need to touch. You can restart P5 via the menu down here, and P5 will now be configured. The service will be to start up when this Windows boots. Something additional to note is that because P5 is running as a service on your Windows operating system, that service won't be able to see drives that you're mapping in the graphical interface here. So for example, if you have access to a network share on a remote server, or maybe you mapped a drive to that server, then that will not be visible to P5 running as a service on this Windows OS, because it's running in a different context as a different user. There's a mechanism by which you can allow that P5 service to see network shares, however, and there's a separate video on our YouTube channel about this, which is here. So as you can see, it's called Connecting P5 Running on Windows to Network Shares, and you can find this video in our ArchiWare P5 YouTube channel. Here we are on a Mac, and this is ArchiWare's download page, which you can get to on their website, archiware.com, and then click on the download. There are two ways to install on the Mac. Let's begin with the first one on the download page here, which is the traditional DMG download, which has a DMG disk image with an installer inside. So that downloads in Chrome here, and if we open that up, we can run the installer package. So there's a README and some other stuff on the right hand side, but this is the installer that you need to worry about. So we'll continue through here past the README, past the license agreement, allowing it to access removable disks. You may or may not see that depending on what you've got mounted on your Mac. And then we just continue through to install, which requires a password. This will install the background process on the Mac, and then open up the web admin interface in a browser, pretty much the same as it did on Windows. So on Mac it always prefers Safari, even though I'm using Chrome. So there we go, we're running. You can see the browser is pointing to the loopback address on port 8000, which is where the P5 interface is always available. An additional thing to take care of on the Mac is that in order for P5 to have full access to disks connected to the Mac, storage directly connected to the Mac, you need to go to the System Preferences window, or System Settings as it's now called. Under the Privacy and Security section, there's a section called Full Disk Access, where you can allow certain applications to have access to all the disks connected to the Mac. So we need to add P5 in here. To do that, we're going to press the plus button at the top. I just need to authenticate here, and then we get a way to pick what it is that we want to provide this full disk access permission to. We need to locate P5's main executable in order to add it to the list. The easiest way to do this is to flick back to the Finder and use the Go To Folder option in the Finder, and then in here type in usr/local/aw/bin and hit return, and this will open up a folder separately to the folder that you're going to drag into, which is over here. And in this folder you need to locate the binary which is called NSD. Okay, and you need to drag that one into this window over here, so that this is the executable that you're giving full disk access to. Then hit open, and you'll then be able to see NSD listed down here because you just added it, and make sure that it's switched on so that NSD has full disk access. Once you've done that, you're good to go, and your RQware P5 will have disk access on this Mac. So there's an additional step there because Apple's operating systems are protecting you from software having full disk access without you knowing about it. So with that, let's just switch to the download page again, and I will show you how to download the TGZ file. So we'll click New Installation again, and my download menu will now show me this TGZ file. I'm going to open this up in the folder where it's been downloaded to, and here is our TGZ file. And to proceed with this installation, we need to open a terminal window. I'll add that I've just, whilst the recording was paused, I removed the installation of P5 that we just performed on this Mac, so P5 is no longer running on this Mac, so we can install it again using this alternative method. So what follows is going to assume that you know what terminal is and have some experience in how to use it. You maybe also have experience with Linux in order to have this level of knowledge. So the following isn't for the faint-hearted, and you should probably begin by using the first installation method that I showed you. But for completeness, I want to show how this works as well. So in the terminal, I'm going to elevate myself to be the super user so that I can install P5. My current directory is USR local. I'm going to make a directory called AW and change to the AW directory. So I'm now, print working directory says that I'm now in USR local AW. And I'm going to move the installer file from the downloads folder to dot, which is the current folder. And now if I list files, we can see the TGZ file is now in my current directory. However, important information, on a Mac, if you list with attributes, you'll see that Apple has set a quarantine bit, which means don't trust this file because it's been downloaded from the web. So there's a special command that we use to remove the quarantine bit that looks like this, and we're specifying the name of the installer. So that deletes the quarantine bit. So if I run this command again, you can see it's no longer showing that there's a quarantine on it. And next we're going to use the tar command to unzip, extract the file awpst. And then if we list the files in the directory again, we'll see that we have all of RQware's installation ready to go in this folder. The next step is that we just run the start script, which is /start server. This runs P5 and also sets it up to start when the machine boots, which is something that the graphical installer also does. So whenever your macOS operating system starts up, P5 will be running. So we get the information back that P5 is running, and it provides me with the URLs. And so now we can go to the browser. So if I just go back to Safari, if I refresh this, we can now see that P5 is running, and I'm able to access this login screen again because P5 is running. The things that we had to do to allow P5 to access disks would also apply just the same here. So yeah, basically that's an alternative way to install P5 using the terminal, and as you saw, it doesn't really take any longer, but you need to know a few shell commands to be able to do that. So yeah, on the Mac, I think that's all you need to know. You can always use the stop and start commands in the USR local AW directory to stop and start the P5 installation, whether or not you use the graphical installer or did it in the command line. The software is installed to the same location. The software is exactly the same. It's just a different mechanism for getting it onto the computer, and the start and stop scripts that you can see in this folder can always be run from the command line to stop and start P5. Now let's run through how you install P5 on a Linux host. I'm going to do this from my Mac desktop, and I'm going to use the terminal application to SSH into two different Linux machines, both of which I've got running in the cloud. The first one is actually running Amazon AWS Linux, but that is a Red Hat stroke CentOS stroke Rocky type distribution of Linux that has the RPM package manager. And in my other terminal tab, I've got an Ubuntu Linux also running in the cloud, and this one is using the dpackage package manager. So what I'll do is I'll show you how to do an install without using a package manager, and then we'll look at installing using RPM on the CentOS Red Hat style distribution and using dpackage on the Ubuntu. I hope that's making sense so far. So to kick off, we need to download P5. If you go to RQware's download page, you can download a TGZ, a DEB, or an RPM of the latest version of P5. If you click these links, then your browser will download, in this case to my Mac, which is not where I want to have the install file. So what I'll do is I'll use the link here, and I'll use the drop down to copy the link address, in this case for the TGZ file. And then if I go back to my terminal, in the shell, I can use the wget command and then paste in the link that I copied out of the browser, and that will download the Linux installer for me. And now if I do an ls in this directory, you can see I now actually have two versions of the TGZ. I've got the 723, which we just downloaded because that's the latest version as of today, and I've got some slightly older versions, 721, in this folder as well. The reason I've got the older versions is because I want to later show you how to do an update from an older to a newer version. So let's begin by installing what I would call manually, without using a package manager, using a TGZ file. So to do this, what you do is you create the RQware directory where it's going to run, you expand the TGZ, and then you simply use the start and stop scripts to bring the product up and down. So first of all, I'm going to make the directory where RQware lives. So the standard directory for us, where all of the package managers will install to on the all the platforms except Windows, is user local AW. So after creating that folder, I'm going to change directory, so I am now in that folder, and I will run the wget command again to download P5 in this folder, but I'm going to take the 721 version, so I'm just going to tweak the URL that we're downloading from to get that version. Let's clear the window, and then if we have a look to see what we've got, in this folder we've got the TGZ file, and we're currently in the user local AW directory. The TGZ is a compressed archive. The command to extract it is tar with a Z to uncompress the zip element, X to expand, and F to specify the file that we're expanding, followed by the TGZ file. Hit return. After a brief pause, if you now list the files again in this directory, you'll see that we now have a P5 installation waiting to be started up. Simply run the start server script using the // to run from the current directory, and you'll get a message to indicate that we're starting up, but to be patient, followed by the URLs that we need to connect to the web interface, either via HTTP on port 8000. So you see port 8000 is the default port for the non-encrypted HTTP access to the web admin interface, or HTTPS on port 8443. This is using a self-signed cert, so your browser will complain about that. And for the purposes of our video, we'll use the HTTP interface, and it says use a web browser to connect. So P5 is now installed on this machine, it's running, and the start script, as well as starting the software up right now, it will update the start scripts in the operating system so that P5 will start when the OS boots up. And if you run the stop script, it will both stop P5 running now, and it will also remove those start scripts. So after a reboot, P5 will no longer be running. So it's quite important to understand that. So in order to test that this installation is working, because this is running in the cloud, and these are actually the local like LAN addresses for this host, I need to use a public IP, or in fact a VPN IP in this case, that will get me to this host. And that I already have plumbed into the browser here. So if I refresh, then we can see that 7.2.1 is serving up its web interface, and that's happening from the machine that we just installed P5 on. The default username and password is always admin and admin, so we can test everything's working by logging in, and we should see welcome to ArchiWare P5, not a good password, and the next step might be to insert a license key. So that's how you would install P5 using the TGZ file. So what I'm going to do next is stop P5. So I get a message to tell me that it's stopped. I'm going to move back one directory, and I'm going to remove the ArchiWare folder in its entirety. So that would be the steps required to completely uninstall P5, stop the process running, and remove the directory. If I now go back to my home directory and have a look what we have in the home directory, we can now install using the RPM. So the RPM is the Red Hat Package Manager, which is the default package manager for Red Hat, CentOS and Rocky distributions of Linux. And the package manager will install P5 for you. It'll create the directory, expand the software, start it up. The package manager also tracks what software is installed and would allow you to update the software as well using the package manager, or remove the software. The tool that we use for installing RPM files is called RPM, and the parameter to install is I for install, and then we specify the awpst RPM file as the software package that we want to install. Hit return, and RPM will both create the directory, expand the software, and start the product up. So we see the same message that we saw after we ran the start script ourselves. If I go back to my browser and refresh, then I can see that P5 is up and running and giving me its web interface. And if I change directory to USR local AW, I'll find that I've got my P5 installation in there just as we had earlier. The command that you could use to see what RPM has installed would be RPM-QA, which gives me a long list of software. We can actually see RQware 721 at the bottom. So what you could do is run RPM-QA and then grep for P5, and that would just show you the current version of P5 that's installed. So once P5's been installed with the package manager, you should use the package manager to install newer versions. So if I wanted to install 722, I would download that RPM, use RPM-I, and then the name of that package with the 722 version of P5 to update it. Okay, with that, let's switch over to my other tab here where I have a Ubuntu installation. On here, I want to grab the Ubuntu installer, so I'm going to go back to RQware's download page. And the Ubuntu OS would use the deb installer, as you can see shown here. So if I click New Install, I'm going to use my copy link address from the link in the browser and then go back to the tab in our terminal that's pointing at our Ubuntu installation, and we'll do a wget to download the file that we just copied. And now in the directory we can see our awpst.deb file. The command to install it is dpackage -i for install and then the name of the package. And then dpackage, which is the package manager, will tell us what it's doing. It's unpacking and then starting the software. There we go, we've got the URLs shown in the command line. And if we change directory to USR local AW, we will see our installation that has been installed by the Debian package manager. And if I go to my browser and use the IP of this remote machine as follows, so I'll replace this IP with this one, then we get our P5 login page. Now, depending on whether P5 knows that it's running in a cloud instance, it may use the instance ID. This is specifically in the case of AWS. When installing in AWS, P5 may detect that it's running in an AWS cloud instance. And rather than using the default password of admin, we will use the Amazon EC2 instance ID as the password. So that's what's happening in this particular case, and you can see that P5 is prompting us to use the EC2 instance ID as the default password, and then once you're in you can change the password. So that's how you install on a Ubuntu/Debian operating system. Okay, now let's look at installing P5 on a Synology. Here is my Synology. It's running version 7.1.1 of DSM. So this is what I'm running at the time of recording. We install P5 using the store on a Synology. So we simply go to the package center, search for RQware or P5, and we'll find RQware on here. The version is currently 7.2.2. Obviously this changes, but it doesn't change as frequently as we would like. So therefore you may find that the version available for your Synology is somewhat lagging behind the version that you could install on other hosts. It is possible to do a manual install of P5 by downloading the SPK file from the RQware download page, but this will be the same version as you'll find in Synology's store, because the manual installer has to be approved by Synology because the software has to be signed by them. It's also possible to install P5 on a Synology within a Docker environment, but that's beyond the scope of this video, so we'll cover that in another one. But let's proceed and install 7.2.2. So this is a case of just clicking on buttons and waiting. So at this point we have to agree to RQware's end user license agreement, and the wizard will apply the following. So it's going to install everything as expected, and obviously we want to run the software after we've installed it. And it's installed. So once it's running, you have a button through which you can stop and start P5 on the Synology, or you can uninstall the software entirely. So now that it's running, as with all P5 installations, we should open a tab, HTTP on port. Now it's slightly different. So on a Synology, ArchiWare runs on port 20,000. So previously on all the hosts that we've installed on, the default port is 8,000. So we're talking about the TCP/IP port here that P5 listens on for HTTP, HTTPS connections. On a Synology, it's not possible to use 8,000 as our port, so we changed the port to 20,000. This means that the URL for accessing in the browser like this is different, and also if you're adding and also when configuring a server to talk to this Synology as a P5 client, one has to specify a different port, which we'll come to later in this video. So we can see here we have the web UI available to us, just as it was on all the other platforms, and we can log in and get to the point where we would be able to enter a license key. So that's how we install on Synology. So finally, let's install P5 on this QNAP. We're running version 5.17 at the time of recording on this NAS. To install P5, again, we go via the App Center, and in here we search for ArchiWare or P5, which will locate version 7.11. So this is a bit behind the versions available on the Synology. We hit the install and wait a little while, and now P5 is installed. So if we click on this icon, we can see a little bit about P5, and we can, through the drop down, either stop and start P5 or remove it entirely. If I click the open button here, then by default this links through to the HTTPS admin interface, and this is failing because the certificate is self-signed at this point. If we proceed through the warning though, we can connect with the usual admin and admin defaults, and we get through to the usual familiar initial screen once logged in. So that's how you install P5 via the store, but it's also possible to do a manual install of P5 using the installer that you can download from the download page on ArchiWare's website, and that means that you can run the latest version of P5 if that version isn't available in the store. So to show you how to do that, I'm first going to remove P5 again from this QNAP. And while we're waiting for that to remove, we will go to ArchiWare's download page and we'll pull down the QNAP installer. And if we go back to the QNAP, you can see we now have an install button, so it's uninstalled. So we can go to the little plus button over here to do a manual install and browse for the file that we just downloaded. Select the Q package file and hit the install button. And this will install version 7.2.3, which is much more recent than the one on the QNAP store. So now we see the app is installed and ready to use. And if I refresh, you can see that version 7.2.3 of P5 is now running on this QNAP. Now, the TCP/IP port that the HTTP interface runs on is different again on a QNAP. It's actually 8001. So if I if I switch tabs here and go to port 8001/login on HTTP, we'll get to the login screen for the QNAP. So yeah, 8001 is the port for HTTP, and 8444 is the port for HTTPS, if you want to connect via HTTPS. Just a quick recap on my whiteboard of the various different operating systems on which you can run P5. and the default HTTP here and HTTPS ports that we listen on for the web interfaces. You'll notice that that in all cases the HTTPS port is the HTTP port plus 443. So you can figure out one from the other. And the HTTP port can be changed by editing the config file, which you'll find inside of the config folder, and that file is called lexserv.8000 by default, but if you rename the 8000 part of that file, then you'll change the HTTP port that we listen on, and then as a consequence of that, the HTTPS port will change to this plus 443. If you do connect to P5 using HTTPS, however, you can expect to get the usual browser warnings that you don't have a real certificate installed, so the site will be considered to be insecure. It's possible to install your own certificate, and this is covered in the documentation. When it comes to upgrading ArchiWare, you need to know whether or not a package manager is used to install P5 on your system. So either a package manager was used or one wasn't, and how we determine this is Windows has a package manager, so whenever you install software on Windows it knows what's installed, and you can go to add remove programs, and that's how you would remove ArchiWare. So to update on Windows, you simply run the installer directly on the Windows OS for the newer version, and then that will update your installation in place. So Windows is pretty simple. If you installed via a NAS store, so we're talking about Synology mainly and QNAP here, then you would go to the store to update ArchiWare P5, because it's the store. And the NAS device keeps track of what software is installed and knows what versions are installed, so update via the store. If you installed on Linux, then there's a couple of different ways you might have done it. You might have done it via the RPM on a Red Hat package manager installer, in which case you need to use RPM. The command is RPM minus capital U to update and then provide the new name of the RPM file. If you installed on a Debian type OS using a deb file, then you would use the dpkg, that's the package manager, and then you would just use the I for install and then provide the name of the newer package. So that covers the main package managers that you might use to install ArchiWare. On the other side, where package managers aren't used, this is basically going to be macOS. So macOS doesn't use a package manager to install ArchiWare. And also, if you installed on Linux via a TGZ file, so Linux using the TGZ, which doesn't use a package manager, you're just basically expanding the product in a directory, then again, you didn't use a package manager. And in these cases where a package manager wasn't used, you can use the graphical user interface for P5 to do an update, and I'm going to show you what that looks like and how that works now. And that works for macOS or Linux operating systems, or even FreeBSD, where you installed using a TGZ file. So let's have a look at that. So here's how to update P5 using the web admin interface in the browser. I have here a 721 installation, which is running on Linux, on CentOS type Linux. It was installed with the TGZ, so there's no package manager involved in this installation, and therefore I can go to the P5 menu, I can do software update in the browser, check for updates, which requires an internet connection and tells us that there is a slightly newer release which we can download. This will download the package. Once downloaded, click here to update and restart the P5 server. Once the server is updated, we can click the login button to get back to the login screen, and now we can see that we have version 7.2.2 running rather than 7.2.1. In all cases, regardless of how you're performing the update, you should be sure to make a backup of your installation before you proceed with the update. And also note that if you're using one of the installer mechanisms to update P5, then stop P5 before you do the update and then start again afterwards and verify that the version that you're expecting is now reported via the web interface. It's also worth checking your license, because if you're out of support, then you may not be entitled to run the very latest versions of P5. So use the RQware portal site to check your license and see which is the latest version that you're allowed to run. If you're under a support maintenance agreement, then of course you'll be able to run the very latest versions, whatever that happens to be at the time. Let's take a look at license keys. When you first log in to P5's web admin interface, you'll see Welcome to RQware and the suggestion that you might want to enter a license. This isn't necessarily what you need to do for all of your P5 installations. For example, if you're running P5 as a client and running P5 on another host as a server, that would mean that the P5 server could back up and archive the P5 client, but the client doesn't need its P5 installation to be licensed. It can run an unlicensed P5 just as a sort of as a slave. And in a moment in this video, I'll run through P5 servers and clients, and that will all make more sense. But if you do want to put a license key into your P5 installation, then this is how you do it. So we'll click on the Enter License button, which simply takes us to the License Manager part of the UI on the left-hand side. From here, we can click the button at the bottom to get a trial license. We can go to the RQware portal to register a purchase license, and then we can use the Add button on the left to add a license. There are broadly two different types of P5 license. There's a trial, which is something that will run for a limited amount of time to let you try P5 out, and there's a permanent license which you've purchased, and that license key is generated specifically for the host on which you want to run it. Now, if we click the Get Trial License button down on the right-hand side here, P5 will report to us our host ID. This is a unique string generated from the MAC address of the primary Ethernet adapter. So it's unique to whichever host P5 is running on. And it's this host ID that RQware used to generate a permanent key or to generate a trial. So let's go ahead and get a trial license. If we click Continue here, then we get two options. We can either generate a 5-day trial for a quick overview of P5 that just requires an email address, or you can get a 30-day trial license, which gives you a longer evaluation period. Also, you get access to support, but your company details will be required to obtain this kind of license. This is done via RQware's portal website, where you would go and generate an account so you can get that 30-day trial. Let's first get a 5-day trial license. So we request our trial key, we provide an email address in the box, and we get a trial license, and then we will immediately get the license key. So this is tied to our host. It's a 5-day trial. That's the license type. You can see there. So 5 days takes us to the 18th of June, and this is the actual license key. So just to begin, let's put this license key into our P5 installation. So I'm going to click on the Add Manually button. This gives us our license configuration, and from here there are two different types of license that we can enter. We can either enter a trial, so these three at the top, 5-day, 30-day, channel evaluation, are trial licenses, and if I choose one of these, then you can see the serial number is already pre-filled for me, because the trial, 5-day trial, always has the same serial number. And I get an expiry date, so this is the date that the trial will end, plus the license key. If I choose a purchase product, like a backup package, the first one here, you'll see that instead of an expiry date, we have a maintenance expiry date. So this is generated with the key and means that you'll get a date where your license key maintenance expires. So all purchase licenses come with 1 year. and then customers extend that by purchasing additional years. So there will be a maintenance expiry date associated with a given serial number, and also you get to put in your own serial number and license key. So difference between evaluation where you have an expiry date and a real license, a purchase license where there's a maintenance expiry, but the product, even if the maintenance expires, a permanent purchase serial number will run for an indefinite amount of time. It's just that there's a maintenance expiry date where the support and access to updates will end. So with all that said, let's go for the 5-day trial. My trial ends on the 18th of June, so let's pick that. And my license key, I will copy and paste, and then we'll apply the license and close the window and close this one too. And now you can see that my license manager has one license with this serial number, a 5-day trial, and so on. And now also you'll be able to see that the buttons for backup, archive and synchronize across the top that were previously grayed out are now lit up in color, which means that we can go and start configuring P5 however we want to do it. Now, if you were after a 30-day trial, if we go back to the license manager and click on the Get Trial License, we could apply for a 30-day trial license, but this will mean that we'll get redirected to RQA's portal website, where we would first need to create an account by registering, and once logged in, we will be able to get that 30-day trial. You'll also be able to speak to your local sales partner for RQware or distribution partner, and you could ask them if you're in touch for a 30-day channel evaluation license. In this final section of this installation video, I'll show you how to log in to P5's web-based admin interface, what that looks like, and then some troubleshooting tips. So to get to RQware's web interface, as previously mentioned, using HTTP, as you can see in my address bar here in the browser, I am putting in the IP address of the host that's running P5 that I wish to administer. I'm using port 8000 because that's the port that we by default run the admin interface on for HTTP. And then if you were logging in, you would generally use /login on the end of the URL to get to the login screen, which is where we are here. The default password and username is admin for both, and I warned to change that because it's not secure. I'm looking at a licensed P5 installation here, so the license activates all of the 3 modules: backup, archive and synchronize, so you can see those tabs across the top. If I was configuring archive, for example, which we will cover in the archive video, then all of the options down the left hand side, including some advanced options at the bottom, these are all the things that need to be set up and configured in order to use archive. Not necessarily all of them, but at least some of them. So everything pertaining to archive is covered in the archive tab, likewise for synchronize and backup. In the restore tab here, you can, when you're backing up and archiving, we're adding files to indexes, and under the restore tab you can browse what's been backed up and archived and then choose what you would like to recover or restore back to disk. Over on the right hand side there's a jobs and logs menu which allows you to monitor currently active jobs. So let's have a look in there. So the P5 job monitor window breaks down into 3 sections. Let's just make it a little larger. So at the top I can see any queued jobs which will be running on a scheduler. So you can see this job here is running at 6 AM in the morning. Queued jobs can be started now, or you can cancel them so they don't run in future. So I could run this job now rather than waiting for it to run at its scheduled time. Running jobs, we don't have any at the moment, but I'll fire a job off in a second. And then at the bottom you can see jobs which finished in the last 24 hours or so. So you can see for each job which has run, there is a dot, coloured dot against it, which indicates whether it was successful in the case of this job here. So I can double click on here to see the details about the job which ran in this case successfully, and the job log shows me everything about that job that I might need to know. And then a job which failed, I can double click on to see why that job failed, and that's because a host wasn't reachable in this particular instance. Okay, I'm now going to run a job so you can see what it looks like to have a running job. There we go. So you can see we have an archive task here running, which is using tape. So this is telling me that it's currently controlling a jukebox and transporting a tape from a slot to a drive. There's a little disclosure triangle here which allows me to see more detail about what's going on. And a running job like this will give us stats about the speed at which it's writing data once it begins running, once it's got a tape in the drive. So yeah, queued jobs, running jobs, completed jobs in the job monitor window. You can also filter based on the type of job down the left-hand side, and also filter based on clients. P5 can run multiple jobs simultaneously, so it's possible that you might have several running jobs appearing in the running jobs list. You can cancel a running job from the menu here. The job history here at the bottom, finished jobs, only shows you the jobs which ran in the past 24 hours. So to go back further, you can go to the job history window, which is here. And the job history window gives you a chronological list of jobs in the time range that you select on the left-hand side. So you can see past week, past 3 months, or you can enter a custom period. You can also filter on the type of job and the result, whether it was successful or not. And this list also shows us how much data was saved by jobs which ran recently. This is where you would come if you're running a daily backup, for example, just to check that the backup was successful and to see how much data the backup saved, so you can make sure that the amount of data being saved is consistent with your expectations. The job logs can also be emailed out, so you can configure an email server to deliver emails from your P5 server, and then all of the job logs can be delivered to users. We won't cover that in this video, but it'll be in a more advanced video that will follow. So yeah, this is the job log history window. Obviously, over the course of months and years, there will be many thousands of jobs which P5 has run, and so this is paginated, and you can move back in time by going through the pages to find jobs which ran. You can also obviously enter a specific time period here to find a particular job. And finally, over here in the P5 menu, you can access a PDF user guide for the version that you're running, which will open in the browser. A link to the MasterClass videos, which you've already found, so well done for finding that. And down here, the important one is download support data. So this is really good for troubleshooting. What this does is downloads a zip file which contains information about your P5 installation, this P5 installation. So let's have a look. Let's open the window where we downloaded the file to. And you can see here we have a zip file, which is a convenient way to send this support data to somebody that's trying to assist you with support. If we look inside, you'll see that we have a number of log files. P5 is currently writing to this file at the top here, lexserv.log. So you can see information about things which have recently run, like the job which just completed. That we just ran. So P5 is in this file, P5 is giving a relatively low level log of everything that's occurring. So this is really useful for a support representative to figure out if there's an issue with P5 and how it might be resolved. These files are created or rotated each day. So each time ArchiWare restarts, which it tries to do between 4 and 7 AM each day, it will create a new log file and rotate the old ones and keep some number in the history. So the zip file contains some of these log files going back in time. It also contains this database file, which is the configuration for this installation. So all of the configuration lives in a SQLite database, and this is included in the support download, alongside the system log from the operating system itself, plus some other auxiliary files that might be useful for diagnosing issues. So yeah, the download support data is a really handy way to get all of the information about this installation downloaded in a convenient single file. A couple of final things in this menu to note. There is an option to change your password. So the default password is always admin. Use this option to change the current password admin to a proper password. And finally in the menu you can look at the About P5 window, which shows you which version you're running, your host ID, which is needed for generating keys, and the expiry date of the evaluation license that we're currently running. And over here in the Job Monitor window you can see the job which I just ran a few moments ago has now also completed. So yes, that's a quick tour of RQware's web interface. So thanks for watching this video. You have just watched video number 1, installation and licensing. Please now proceed to videos 2 or 3, showing how to configure LTO and cloud storage, followed by either video 4, P5 backup, or video 5, P5 archive.